This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. Did Betty Friedan really know what she was doing? Did she know that she would change the world a little bit? When she published in 1963, The Feminine Mystique, she probably did. Suddenly, people all over the Western world were talking about equal rights, equal pay, and equal opportunities and so on for women, but it was much deeper than that. The subject, of course, has become both commonplace and an industry that remains still a bit of a mystery. Today, it's amazing how many men will call themselves and declare that they are feminists. I am one such person, whatever that may mean. We'll find out. Our guest, David Moscrop, teaches, among other things, political science at UBC, but writes frequently about these kinds of ideas, and he recently wrote a piece that was published in several of the post-media papers across the country, titled, Why All Men Should Be Feminists. And I love this subtitle, David. If true equality, not to mention civic maturity, is to be achieved, men need to face harsh truths. Let's hold off on the harsh truths for a moment, because we'll have people falling off their sofas. What do you mean by civic maturity? What does it mean for, we live in a city where our so-called leaders are always blathering on about the civil society.
Well, a part of maturity, I think, is coming to understand what the world is like and what it's really like, not what you think it's like.
Like, for example?
For example, when you talk about equality and expect the world to play out that way, and
yes,
yet the reality on the ground, I mean, the statistically verifiable reality doesn't match that, then you're really in a delusional world. Part of civic maturity is understanding on the ground what it looks like, not in theory the liberal state, the liberal society, which is, of course, theoretically and in a lot of cases legally equal.
Yes.
But the maturing part is coming to understand that that's not the case.
When you say on the ground, you mean in practical terms, going to the
Absolutely.
grocery store, at the pub, at the library, in marriage.
In your home,
yes,
in the workplace especially. I mean, the
yes,
statistics in the home and the workplace are the ones that are most frightening.
Like?
Well, the wage gap in Canada,
yes,
on the whole, is 21 cents on the dollar. So a woman is most likely to make 21 cents less than a man for full year work in the same or similar position. If you're a skilled tradeswoman, that's 65 cents on the dollar.
Ouch.
If you're in the home as a woman, you're most likely doing twice as much childcare work and almost twice as much chores, twice as many chores.
Do you think that there's still an enormous hold on very old traditional ideas, an enormous hold on the woman's places in the home? And
no, I don't. And
okay,
I think that's the twist, is that the dialogue that's coming out, the sort of narrative that we're spinning, especially from younger people,
yes,
is one of equality. So when I wrote this piece and people
yes,
responded by saying all kinds of things, one of them was, well, no, we're equal. My teacher's a woman, yes, my doctor's a woman.
Right.
And this equality, that's the smoke.
And good.
And
okay,
the idea, right, it's nice that the
yeah,
narrative is there, but the reality doesn't match the narrative, and that's the problem.
Well, what's unreal about the fact that there's no denying that that person's teacher is a woman or that person's doctor is a woman, so what's the delusional part of it?
That not all women have an equal chance to be doctors, or
Why?
don't have the same chance as men.
Why don't they?
I don't know. That's the problem. Is that I think part of it is that when, and I could be wrong, this is speculating, when women look into the world and say, what are other women doing? What can I do?
Yes.
They don't see the opportunities of doctor, lawyer, whatever. And they're grossly underrepresented in those areas and overrepresented in traditional women's, nurses, teachers, whatever. And part of getting to real equality is that every woman gets the chance to say, well, I could be any of those things. I could be a CEO. But of course, there are so few CEOs. I mean, short men can't even be CEOs, right? You know,
Short men,
a disproportionate number of CEOs are male
tall.
and 6'2" or more.
Yeah.
So part of what we need to do then is understand that, well, what's the projection that we're making for women when they're young?
What is it?
You're going to be a teacher, maybe. Maybe you can be a nurse. But you're not going to be in engineering, you're not going to be in science. I mean, women are grossly underrepresented in these fields. And part of getting to a point where we can experience better equality is having those role models out in the field so that young women growing up can say, I can do that too. And part of the reason that men need to get engaged is that as predominantly the gender that shares the spoils of society, we need to engage so that it's a more fair system, then we can share those spoils a little better.
One of the very interesting and clear and more defined areas that's so fascinating is sport, and in particular, we've just been through an Olympics and a Paralympics. We do see women athletes doing phenomenal things, but there's a couple of buts.
Yeah.
Number one, it has taken enormous effort on the part of many athletes, male and female, to get equality in terms of pay. For example, I'm a tennis freak, so we could go on about tennis, okay? But also, women, are they not, are acculturated to not being competitive. It's not nice to be too competitive. You're really supposed to smile and get along.
Yeah.
Whereas men are acculturated to going out and bashing everybody's head in. We're supposed to be the warrior.
Yeah. Well, and incidentally, as a side note,
yes.
If you look at, say, crime statistics, what's interesting about that is that narrative feeds into the fact that 83% of violent crimes are committed by men, and women suffer 87% of sexual assaults. That's a quick aside, but that narrative feeds into that.
Yes.
What's even more, I think, disconcerting when it comes to sports, and the Olympics especially, is that we have world-class athletes, women and men, but the women are very highly sexualized in their sport, and the men not.
In what way?
Well, I'll give you an example. There was the outfits that volleyball players wear.
Do they wear outfits?
They wear something. Not so much. Not too much.
My eyesight is going, and
But that was it. Was that the women were
naked
scantily
people.
clad.
Yeah.
And the idea was, well, we're not trying to showcase their bodies. We're trying to showcase their talent as athletes.
Yeah.
And then there were advertisements that were being sold on the women. And that was part of the angle, was that, well, look, I mean, men are staring at these women, we might as well try to sell them God knows what, Red Bull or Axe body spray or something like that. So that doesn't happen to men in the same way. I mean, you get traditionals, you get the decals and all of that, but it's not a sexualized kind of thing, not nearly as much. And so the issue is that even when women achieve, say, world-class status as an athlete, it's still highly sexualized.
What do you do with this argument, David? One could argue that women have been used to sell refrigerators and automobiles, mostly automobiles, forever. So you can't sell an automobile on TV without some gorgeous babe going, "Hi, this is a terrific automobile." You could argue that that's just flat dumb, and it's also insulting. But many women might say, "Yeah, but it's a really high-paying gig."
Yeah, that's true. As is, by the way, being a runway supermodel, for instance.
Yes.
But I think the question isn't does that exist?
Yes.
The question is, are there real viable other options for one?
Like?
And is it proportional? I mean, you're probably never going to get rid of sexualized advertising. But the real problem is that it's the insidious bit is that it's disproportionately one gender. That's a problem. And it's fixed. There's one way. There's no control from the bottom. It's male advertising executives who decide what women can be and what men should want. And reclaiming that is the challenge. And that's what I'm talking about in this piece, is saying that men and women need to enlist together to say, well, we're tired of being duped.
It's very interesting that in the entertainment business, because it is utterly a business, that there are still to this date only 3 or 4 women who have been directors of major movies. That we've had a couple of women head up studios. Sherry Lansing comes to mind. We've had a couple of women, run things like that, but very few women actually get to direct a movie. And as Streisand has said repeatedly, everybody said, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
You're a singer, you're an actor. What are you doing? Trying to direct a movie.
Well, I think you have some examples, counterexamples.
Yeah.
Sofia Coppola is one of those.
Yes.
And what the power of those is that the more that you have, the more likely it is that you're going to get more, right? And this is what I think a lot of it turns on, and I was saying this before, I'll repeat it because I think it's really the crux of it. It's about what kind of social and cultural markers we have out there. And are those going to serve as beacons for people for the future? And if you can have them, well, then you're on your way to starting to have a more true equality, not just the theoretical or legal equality.
We'll come back to the sociology in a minute, but we've got about 2 or 3 minutes before the break. Tell us a little bit about your own personal journey on the path of feminism, because it sounds to me, meeting you, talking with you, reading this piece, that you find yourself sort of evolving in some way.
Yeah, and this is one of the challenges, is that when you say to someone you should become a feminist, what you're missing is that it's not a conversion. It's not like you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh my God,
yeah.
I finally, today I'm a feminist. Yeah. It's that it is coming to a realization over time. And so for me, it took several years. I came out of high school. I was a philosophical liberal and a casual misogynist, is what I said. You make the gags because of course you make the gags,
misogynist.
Right? You see in the locker
David
rooms.
Moscrop, CM. Yeah.
Casual, that's right. Registered casual misogynist. But you're in the locker room and you're making the gags. And of course everybody's doing it.
Yes.
And the things that are feeding into your world are backing this up. And then I met some people, some professors, some friends, and that the way they were talking and the things they were talking about led me to believe that maybe my behavior was problematic. Maybe the things I believed weren't entirely so. And over time, I warmed up to that. And it was reflecting on my own life growing up and my own situation. I said, well, not only is that something that's in a book, I saw that.
Yes.
And then that sort of evolution comes through interrogating that. It wasn't a revolution. And so it made all the difference that I was able to come to it slowly. And to this day, I still have to correct myself. I have fantastic people in my department at UBC. I'm a PhD student there. And sometimes I slip up and they'll call me on it. They'll say,
like?
I might use a word that I regret and I don't even think about it. And you call someone a bitch.
Ah, that's very useful.
It's problematic,
it's,
right? But it comes to you like that.
And
it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And you don't even think about it. It just goes.
Yeah, yeah.
And then somebody says, let's take a look and let's talk about why that's wrong.
It's easier to say, that's a dumb bitch.
Yeah.
It's harder to stop and say, I don't agree with that person, and I thought her comments were inappropriate.
And the key is this. You can't really let the perfect get in the way of the good, because it is a matter of building to something better rather than being perfect the next day.
All right. On that note, we take a little break. We'll come back. A lot more to talk about our sexual and gender identities on the subject of feminism. So, davidberner.com is the site to go to. And thoughtoutloud.org, I should have mentioned, is something, is your website or something you contribute to. And this is our opportunity for our friends who are very supportive of us to show themselves and why they support this program here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Back in a moment. This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. All right, on balance, women are disadvantaged vis-a-vis men economically through the wage gap, the double workday, lower rates of promotion, politically through lower rates of representation. How many world leaders do we have we had, who are women? and the frequent denial of basic human rights, even physically, as targets of violence. So says David Moscrop in a recent piece, Why All Men Should Be Feminists. How would you say I or any other man, we have men and women standing about in this studio, how should men go out of their way to become feminists? In what ways? How do they do it?
I think the first point is that there are a number of ways to be a feminist, both as a man and as a woman. And you've got to find what works in your life. So I'll give you some examples of my own, and my own evolving feminist, and imperfect feminism. But the words you use, language choice, makes a difference. What you call people. Do you objectify women in your day-to-day life? Do you advocate for women?
What does objectifying women mean?
Treat as sexual objects. I mean, the creep. Recently there's been a bit of a controversy over the word creep, and men find it distasteful. But as they should, and what they should do is stop being creeps. I mean, staring at women, for instance. I mean, it's wholly inappropriate. That's a way to be a feminist. Stop staring at women like they're objects all the time.
The traditional dichotomy, or not dichotomy, falsity that we will find in men is exhibited, I think, by Tony Soprano, who is making out with all the big-busted women he can find, apart from his marriage, but will literally, because he's a gangster, kill someone who bothers his daughter. And I think so many of us are very much like that. We are very big on protecting our wives and daughters, or mothers, but we think nothing of being salacious in every possible way with other women.
Well, that's another way. So, stop being patronizing, right? And that's the other thing, right? Is that men become patronizing. They want to protect. It's not about protecting. It's about being an ally in resisting insidious oppression. And it means not doing it yourself, but it also means calling it out. And this is one I have a hard time with. You're out with the guys and somebody says or does something ridiculous, stupid. And you have to be the one that says, knock it off, and here's why you should knock it off, which is tough. That's not easy to do.
This is a very subtle business, especially with the use of language. Yeah. You go in a restaurant, and the waitress brings you your food or takes your order or something, or just shows up, and you say, what do you recommend, dear? And you use the phrase dear.
Yeah.
Now, depending on the time of day, the quality of your voice, the look in your eyes, how this young woman is feeling and so on, that could be taken as a gracious, kind word, dear. Or it could be taken as a paternalistic, patronizing schmo.
Yeah.
So is there a formula? Are we to drop the word dear?
Well, I think not necessarily, although I mean, I think probably we should in that case. But the question is, what would you call a man that comes to serve you? Would you call him dear or boy? I mean, probably not, right?
No,
the question is always, are you treating women differently than men because they're women? And that's the litmus test for me. Part of the problem, though, is that a lot of this is non-conscious. Right? We don't even think about it. And of course we think, well, there's no problem there, right? It's just what we do. Or I didn't mean it that way. Or we call someone a grown woman gets called a girl.
Yes.
We don't call grown men boys, typically.
Yes.
And that's another way. So you see that the bias comes out in the way that we talk and the way that we interact.
Actually, now that I think of it, I have to tell you that because we live in an age of such rampant political correctness, I think that I call almost all men that I don't know, regardless of their age, sir. I'll say, thank you, sir. And that could be a 14-year-old kid or a 60-year-old guy, because it simplifies things. Because I know if I use almost any other word, someone's going to arrest me.
Well, yeah, I mean,
or lodge a complaint or something.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when it comes to political correctness, the balance is, I mean, you can say whatever you want in the world, right? We do have fairly robust freedom of speech. The question is, you can, but should you? And when you say it, what does it do to the other person? Yes. And does it make them feel like less of a human being, or more? Does it limit their world, or does it embolden them as human actors? And I think when it comes to trying to reach civic maturity, the question is, the way that we talk to each other, does it empower one another? And if not, then how can we change the way we talk to each other?
Well, there's old pieces of wisdom, like before you speak, is this kind, and is it necessary? Yeah. And often, much of what we say is utterly unnecessary and often unkind. And if we thought about it for a second, We just wouldn't say that, whatever it is. Well, what do you do with people, on the other hand, David, who will say to you, what do you mean? Do we speak to women the same way we speak to men? They're not the same. Of course we're going to speak to them a little differently.
Yeah. Well, that's reasonable. I think the problem isn't, gender essentialism is the problem.
Gender essentialism?
Gender essentialism. This idea that we have...
What does that mean? I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's this idea that we have men and we have women. We have two separate genders.
Yes.
They're different and they're necessarily different.
Yes.
Gender difference is fine by me. Of course the genders are different. But the problem is when you say that difference has to be encased. That difference has to be permanent and you're not allowed. You police those gender borders. And so you have to be this because you're different and you have to be different. That's the problem. And so what we try to do then when we get critical about this is to say, yeah, sure, there's some differences and we should understand those differences. But we should also have room for when people want to try to push those boundaries and move outside of that.
What do you do with the law of unintended consequences? I haven't read Friedan's famous book or 29,000 other books written since on the same subject. No doubt, feminist writers have thought of this already, that many men are going to object to this kind of conversation. Sure. They're going to say, stop bugging me, hey, everything's fine. But what do you do with the man who says, look, feminists have gone overboard. It's great to have equal pay. It's great to have equal work. It's great to have equal opportunity. But you're driving me crazy with all this feminism. Give me a break.
It's hard. It's the sort of the syndrome of the middle-class white male who feels like the world is against him because you have affirmative action and because you are trying to empower women. And the reality is you're not going to reach everybody, I don't think, the same way. All you can do is create a program in which you try to educate and engage with people. You tell them, you show them the numbers, you get them hopefully at an early age. You try to relate it back to them. And I think one of the things I failed to do in the piece was relate it back to men by saying, these are your wives, these are your partners, these are your daughters, these are your sisters. It's about people you know, and here's how it's about people you know. And you try to appeal to them in that way as well. There's going to be some people you can't get, and we're going to have to live with that. But we want to minimize that number of those people you can't get and maximize the number of people you can.
You're a bit of a political junkie. You teach political science and you work in that area as well as another area. And you've followed a bit in the hallways of political action in part of your life. Why haven't we had any really first-rate, top-notch, strong? I've suddenly realized that I'm saying unhappy things about some current leaders, but we haven't had like the leader of Ireland or the leader of Germany or one of the leaders of Israel in the past, and so we just haven't had that leadership. We almost had Hillary, who probably would have done a pretty good job. I mean, it was kind of ironic that the big fight in the Democratic Party last time around was between an African American and a woman.
It's a good sign.
It is a very healthy sign to me, but why, in Canada, why haven't we had that person emerge or those people emerge? Are we getting closer?
There are some very strong women in politics, but Canada ranks 52nd in the world. We're 12th out of 17 in our peer group for women in Parliament.
Wow.
25% of the women in Parliament are women.
Yes.
Most of them from the NDP.
Yes.
And so that's
interesting.
That is interesting.
That's telling.
So part of the issue is that those markers don't exist, I think, for women to look towards. And then also there's institutional factors as well. For instance, wage and profession, right? Because Parliament is made up of fairly particular types of people. The other thing is this, and this is a bit of a conjecture, but I think it's defensible. We have the narrative of equality. And if you think things are equal and that everybody has an equal chance, when you get 25% of women in Parliament, then you say, well, look, women aren't running. Or people aren't electing women. If we want to change it, just elect some women. This is what Trudeau said to Gloria Steinem when she asked him, why don't you have any women? And he said, well, the people of Canada didn't elect women. And it's that myth of that equality, is that if you start to dig...
But did Trudeau go out, and do current leaders go out and say, look, find me some good women candidates?
And I mean, I'm not a partisan. When I vote, I've voted for a few different parties. But they do better because they go out and they recruit strong women. That's part of it. If the political parties start to go and say, look, we want more women, we need more women,
yes.
Not for a few different reasons, so that others can do it in the future, but perhaps for better representation. There's an argument that you get better representation.
Is there any reasonable response to people who say, well, I can't have a woman running the country because she's going to have babies, or
Well, I think the reasonable response is you just wait for them to die. You know, there's the category of people that you're never going to get. No, but really, I mean, and it says the demographics in terms of things like that are on, the young people are saying that much, much less. I mean, that's demonstrably true, that opinion is much less prevalent in young people than it is in older people. And you just have to wait those people out. It's the same thing when it comes to opinions on same-sex marriage.
You're talking about me.
Not you specifically. Not you specifically. But people I know.
I just heard ageism here.
Well, it's not ageism.
Young puppies like you are waiting for old guys like me to die.
For that reason. No, but I mean, again, the demography is such that the progressive opinions, maybe not progressive actions, who knows, but opinions like that are far less predominant in young people than they are in the older generation. And you're just not going to get to some people, and you have to accept that. The key is educating people when they're young.
You hit the right note. We have 30 seconds. Are people talking about these ideas in schools?
Yeah, more than ever.
Good. David.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, David Moscrop. All right, folks. Next week is Thanksgiving, I guess, so the studio will be dark. We'll actually be having a big turkey roast right here in the studio. So during all that, we're going to repeat one of our shows, and one of our most popular, Martin Collicott, for the Center for Immigration Policy Reform, is the show we will rerun that week. And the following week, Bob Jackson, Executive Vice President of the Public Service Alliance of BC, will talk about the lunatics who are trying to close the Kitsilano Coast Guard Station. Bad move. All right, davidberner.com is the site to go to. We welcome your comments, and thank you once again for being with us here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.